Thank you very much, Winston. Well, that's, again, a very different perspective, but very interesting. We've obviously run, I mean, they didn't stick by their 5 minutes, but I didn't want to cut them off because we've had so many interesting speeches here from the panel. We've just got a brief amount of time if anybody does want to come in from the floor. There's a microphone. Please wait for the microphone to come, and we'll perhaps just take sort of 2 or 3 contributions from the floor, and then if you've got questions for the panel. Do you want to actually, first of all,
Stephen Marks made the good point that we can't view China as monolithic in its approach to Africa, but all the panellists refer to Africa in a rather undifferentiated way. Can one, in fact, not draw distinctions between China's approach to different countries? There must be a difference between North Africa and the Republic of South Africa. I wonder if anybody could comment on regional differences, please.
Should we have another question over here?
In the Copper Belt, before privatisation, the mines used to provide a lot of social services, such as free education for the mines employees' children and free healthcare, road maintenance, that kind of thing. And since privatisation, that's stopped. To what extent, this is to anyone, to what extent do you think the new investors, many of which are Chinese, should carry on that responsibility, and to what extent do you think it's fair for them to say, well, mining is our core business, not social services?
Okay, perhaps one more, then we'll the gentleman there.
We talk about China entering Africa, but India, the other great rising power of the world, has traditionally done business, at least in East Africa, all the way down to East Africa, for centuries. Is there any signs of conflict there, or would it be worth commenting on it?
That's for another session, maybe. Okay, should we? I don't know. Am I allowed to go? Because we started slightly late. Yes, can I? Yeah, am I allowed to go on? Yeah. Okay, fine. Right. Does anybody want to comment briefly on the undifferentiated nature of the way that we've talked about Africa? I mean, Richard, did you want to talk about that? Perhaps to differentiate rather more about the way that's, and also about this point about the copper belt.
Well, yeah, any generalisation about Africa, other than it's bounded by the oceans, is very, very difficult. There will always be a lot of exceptions. So, but on the whole, the approach of China has been pretty uniform. And in South Africa, for example, their imports have cost the loss of the textile industry, 70,000 jobs. And Mbeki, it was very, very critical of China and Africa. Elsewhere, you know, where there's oil, it's completely different. I think the big one is going to be food, because they're going for oil at the source. They're going to try and go for food at the source. They've been trying to get tracts of land in Angola and export lots and lots of jobs from China to grow this. Now, this, as we know, land in Africa, and that is a generalisation you can make, is problematic. If you come in as a foreigner and you take land, you're going to have problems. And that's what they're trying to do in Angola, and I think they're going to have quite a big problem. But they do, China needs feeding. Only 7% of China is arable land. They cannot feed that population, particularly with its increasing demand for meat and so on, and they want Africa to grow. Well, if they subcontract to Africa, that would be wonderful, but if they try and do it themselves, I think they'll be in problem. And I just wanted to say one little thing. There's a new Royal African Society Prize, which I'm just announcing today. I don't know what it is yet. But for the first person to discover Chinese workers working under an African. Winston raised the question of racism, yes, and anybody who finds China really working under an African boss, please let me know. There's a prize for that.
What about the point about the copper belts? Stephen, do you want to?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the fringe benefits that you refer to disappeared with privatisation. And as I understand it, the workers who remain from those periods still retain those benefits under their contracts, but there aren't very many of them left. And again, in an internationally competitive environment, any company that did come in, private company that did come in to reopen those mines, would have the attitude you described. So it really would be for the Zambian government to be able to provide those benefits itself. And up till now, it has been the international economic liberalisation orthodoxy that governments should retrench from doing that sort of thing. So, which has had incredibly damaging consequences, including obviously for the development potential of countries. And I think it's quite wrong to play off things like basic education and healthcare against economic development, which seemed at one time was the IMF orthodoxy. So I think this is a broader problem. But certainly there is a problem, as other speakers have mentioned, in the attitudes, managerial attitudes of Chinese management to go to Africa and have attitudes that are developed in China's very repressive environment without any independent trade unions and with a very hierarchical attitude to labour relations. And that's certainly created problems which the more sophisticated Chinese Africa experts and national government officials will freely admit. But that's one of the aspects I mentioned about the difference of China, how that reflects itself in the attitudes of Chinese firms is another matter.
And does anybody want to talk about India and whether there's... Yeah?
Briefly, after China held the China-Africa summit a few years ago, then soon as a journalist, I saw the EU convened a conference of a similar nature, and India. So they realised there is a bit of rivalry there, and that India is doing, I think, a catching up game all along.
Yeah, but are there similar tensions though? I mean, are there similar tensions towards Indian involvement?
At a government, India doesn't support its business people in the way China does, and therefore it's very much more atomised. But India's just set aside a satellite entirely for communications with Africa, mainly to enable Africans to connect with the rest of the world, but with India in particular. And I think that's a very interesting, that's a government decision. Elsewhere it's company by company.